March 22, 1945, late evening. Supreme Headquarters, Reims, France. The phone rang. Eisenhower reached for it absently, his mind still on Montgomery's Operation Plunder. 2 days from now, Churchill himself would stand on the western bank of the Rhine to witness history, 1,000,000 men, thousands of artillery pieces, airborne divisions dropping behind German lines. The Rhine crossing carefully orchestrated, meticulously planned, weeks in the making. The aide's expression stopped him cold. "Sir, it's General Patton. He says it's urgent." Eisenhower took the receiver. "George, what's wrong?" The voice on the other end was electric with barely suppressed triumph. "Nothing's wrong, Ike. Everything's perfect. Third Army crossed the Rhine at Oppenheim this evening. We're across, minimal casualties, building the bridgehead now." Silence. Eisenhower pulled the phone away from his ear and stared at it. Around him, staff officers froze mid-movement. The Supreme Commander's face went through shock, disbelief, and something approaching panic in the space of 3 seconds. "George, say that again, slowly." "We crossed the Rhine tonight, Ike. Assault boats. Germans never saw it coming. We're on the east bank, expanding the perimeter." Patton paused, and Eisenhower could practically hear the grin in his voice. "Oh, and we did it without aerial bombardment, ground smoke, artillery preparation, or airborne assistance. Just wanted you to know." That last line, the deliberate dig at Montgomery's elaborate preparations, hit Eisenhower. Like a physical blow, the impossible had just happened, and George Patton had made it look easy. The Rhine River wasn't just a geographical obstacle in March 1945. It was mythology made water. German children learned it in school. Der Rhein ist unüberwindlich. The Rhine is unconquerable. Hitler himself had proclaimed that Allied armies would drown in its currents if they dared attempt a crossing. German propaganda broadcasts repeated it daily. Let the Allies waste themselves against the Rhine. Germany's ancient river will be their grave. Wehrmacht engineers had turned belief into reality. Every likely crossing point was pre-registered for artillery fire. Machine gun nests covered every approach. Minefields stretched along both banks. The current ran fast and cold, swollen with spring melt from the Alps. The far bank rose in places to commanding heights where German observers could call down death on anyone foolish enough to try. Intelligence reports piled on Eisenhower's desk confirmed it. Crossing the Rhine against determined opposition would be the bloodiest operation since Normandy. Maybe bloodier. British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery treated the challenge with appropriate respect. His staff had been planning Operation Plunder since January, a crossing in the northern sector with overwhelming force. Over 30,000 artillery rounds pre-positioned. 2 airborne divisions ready to drop. Landing craft, amphibious vehicles, bridging equipment, everything that industrial might could provide. Montgomery's approach was methodical, professional, designed to minimize casualties through maximum preparation. The crossing would begin on the night of March 23rd to 24th. Churchill was coming to watch. Newsreel cameras would capture British forces demonstrating to the world how to overcome the impenetrable Rhine. It would be Montgomery's triumph, the vindication of careful planning over reckless aggression. Patton's Third Army, fighting through the Saar region in the south, wasn't even supposed to be in the Rhine crossing business yet. Not until Montgomery secured the northern bridgehead. Not until the logistics were in place for a coordinated multi-army advance. Eisenhower's operational plan was clear. Montgomery crosses first with maximum support. Other armies follow in sequence at designated points. Coordinated, controlled, professional. Nobody planned for Patton to cross first. Nobody imagined he would even try. But on March 21st, the day before Patton's surprise, Eisenhower mentioned to his chief of staff, Bedell Smith, "George is getting close to the Rhine in his sector. I hope to God he doesn't do anything crazy like try to cross before Monty's operation." Smith had laughed. "Sir, even Patton can't improvise a major river crossing. It requires specialized equipment, preparation, coordination." Eisenhower wanted to believe that, but he knew Patton too well to relax. March 22nd unfolded like any other day at Third Army headquarters, except it wasn't. Patton's lead elements had reached the Rhine near the town of Oppenheim the previous day. His engineers quietly reconnoitered the crossing site. No fanfare, No requests for permission. Patton simply looked at the river, looked at his maps, and made a decision. We're going across tonight. His staff stared. Sir, we don't have bridging equipment in position. We have assault boats. Patton cut him off. We have infantry who know how to paddle. The Germans aren't expecting us here. They're all looking north at Montgomery's buildup. This is the opportunity. We take it. At 10 p.m. on March 22nd, elements of the 5th Infantry Division slipped assault boats into the Rhine at Oppenheim. No preliminary bombardment, no smokescreen. Just silence, darkness, and speed. The German defenders, such as they were, never knew what hit them. Most were second-rate troops, older men and teenagers, their attention focused northward where they expected the real attack. By the time they realized American infantry were crossing in their sector, it was too late. By midnight, 6 battalions were across. Casualties. Fewer than 30 killed and wounded. Patton stood on the western bank, watching his men establish the bridgehead, and allowed himself a rare smile. Then he walked to the nearest field telephone. Get me Eisenhower. After Patton's bombshell announcement, Eisenhower sat motionless for 30 seconds. His staff watched their Supreme Commander process multiple contradictory emotions simultaneously. Relief that the crossing succeeded. Horror at the diplomatic nightmare about to unfold. Fury at Patton's complete disregard for operational coordination. And though he'd never admit it publicly, grudging admiration that George had pulled off another impossible feat. George, Eisenhower said carefully, this wasn't in the operational plan. You were supposed to wait. Montgomery's operation launches tomorrow with full Allied support. Do you understand what you've just done? Patton's response was pure, unapologetic Patton. Ike, we found a good crossing point. We had the opportunity. Why the hell would we wait for permission to do what needed doing? The Rhine's just another river. We're across. We're staying across, and we're advancing into Germany. Thought you'd want to know. The line went dead. Eisenhower slowly replaced the receiver. Around him, silence. Then Bedell Smith spoke the words everyone was thinking. What do we tell Montgomery? Eisenhower closed his eyes. The truth. That George Patton crossed the Rhine tonight without authorization, without special preparation, without any of the resources Montgomery's been accumulating for 3 months. He opened his eyes. And that he did it with fewer than 30 casualties. Someone whispered, Sir, Churchill arrives tomorrow to watch the first Rhine crossing. It won't be the first anymore, Eisenhower said quietly. George made sure of that. What happened next revealed the full extent of Eisenhower's political genius. He had to acknowledge Patton's achievement without undermining Montgomery. He had to explain to Churchill that the historic Rhine crossing he'd come to witness was now the second Rhine crossing. He had to manage British pride, American triumphalism, and Patton's ego all simultaneously. His official statement, released the morning of March 23rd, was a masterpiece of diplomatic language. Elements of Third Army have successfully crossed the Rhine at Oppenheim. This operation, combined with the major crossing operation beginning tonight in the northern sector, demonstrates the coordinated Allied advance into Germany. All Allied forces are performing magnificently. The statement satisfied no one completely, but offended no one fatally. Privately, Eisenhower's reaction was far less measured. George has made this a competition again, he told Smith. Montgomery spent months planning a professional operation. George sees an opportunity and grabs it without considering anyone else. Now, Montgomery looks slow by comparison, even though his operation is exactly the kind of careful military planning we should encourage. Yet Eisenhower couldn't deny the results. Patton had crossed the Rhine, Germany's supposedly impenetrable last barrier with minimal casualties and no elaborate preparation. The operational efficiency was undeniable, even if the diplomatic complications were catastrophic. But what did Eisenhower really say to Patton in private? According to Patton's diary entry from March 23rd, Eisenhower called him for a second, more candid conversation. George, you pulled off another impossible achievement. Operationally, it's brilliant. Diplomatically, it's a nightmare. You've embarrassed Montgomery before his operation even begins. You forced me to manage another crisis created by your refusal to follow plans. A pause, then, but goddamn it, you crossed the Rhine and you did it your way. Patton's response was characteristically direct. Ike, I didn't cross the Rhine to embarrass Monty. I crossed because it needed crossing and we had the opportunity. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Take opportunities when they present themselves? Eisenhower reportedly sighed. George, one day I'm going to write a book about this war. And an entire chapter will be titled, The Challenge of Commanding Patton. Make sure you spell my name right, Patton shot back. Despite the levity, Eisenhower understood the deeper significance of what Patton had achieved. The Rhine crossing wasn't just another Patton stunt. It demonstrated principles that challenged conventional military wisdom. First, surprise and audacity could overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable through conventional approaches. The Rhine wasn't any less formidable on March 22nd than it would be on March 24th, but Patton's unexpected timing and aggressive execution achieved success that elaborate planning might not have improved. Second, American operational flexibility exceeded that of more traditional military organizations. British forces wouldn't have attempted what Patton did. German forces, for all their tactical excellence, had become rigid by 1945. Patton's improvisational aggressiveness represented a distinctly American approach to warfare. Third, and most significantly, Patton's controversial command style produced results conventional commanders couldn't match. The German reaction to Patton's crossing was immediate and panicked. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, newly appointed Commander-in-Chief West, received the report at 2 a.m. on March 23rd. His response was recorded by his aide. That's impossible. Our intelligence shows Patton's forces aren't positioned for a Rhine crossing. He lacks the necessary equipment and... Herr Feldmarschall, the reports are confirmed. American forces are across at Oppenheim in battalion strength and expanding. Kesselring stared at the map. How? How did he do it so quickly? Assault boats, sir. No preparation, no bombardment. They simply crossed. Kesselring's assessment was brutally honest. Gentlemen, we have been outmaneuvered by a commander who doesn't believe in impossible. Alert all units. Patton is across the Rhine. God help us all. German propaganda, which had spent weeks proclaiming the Rhine impenetrable, suddenly went silent. How do you explain that the Great Barrier fell not to overwhelming force, but to a simple night crossing with assault boats? The psychological impact on German defenders was devastating. If Patton could cross the Rhine with minimal preparation, what else was possible? What other impossible defenses might crumble before American audacity? Wehrmacht veterans later admitted that Patton's Rhine crossing broke something fundamental in German confidence. We knew the war was lost, one officer recorded. But when Patton crossed the Rhine as if it were nothing, we knew the end was close. Montgomery's Operation Plunder, launched on schedule the night of March 23rd to 24th, it was everything Patton's crossing was not. Massive, methodical, overwhelming. Thousands of artillery pieces opened fire. Airborne divisions dropped behind German lines. Landing craft and amphibious vehicles crossed in waves. Engineers threw bridges across the river with industrial efficiency. Churchill stood on the western bank and watched. Newsreel cameras captured it all. The operation was a complete success. Montgomery established a major bridgehead and began advancing into Germany. But the headlines told a different story. Patton crosses Rhine first. Third Army beats Montgomery across Germany's last barrier. Surprise crossing upstages elaborate operation. Montgomery was furious, though he maintained public composure. Privately, he complained to British officials that Patton's reckless grandstanding undermined the professional military operation he'd worked months to prepare. Eisenhower found himself in the middle, trying to praise both commanders without favoring either, but he knew the truth. Patton had won the public imagination. The audacious surprise crossing would be remembered long after Montgomery's methodical operation faded from memory. In the weeks following the Rhine crossings, as Allied armies drove into the heart of Germany, Eisenhower had time to reflect on what Patton's achievement really meant. In a letter to General George Marshall, he wrote, "Patton's Rhine crossing encapsulates everything about commanding George. He's exasperating, brilliant, diplomatically impossible, and ultimately invaluable. He doesn't ask permission because he knows we might say no. He doesn't coordinate because coordination might slow him down. He doesn't follow plans because plans might limit opportunities. But he gets results that no other commander could achieve. And in the end, that's what wins wars. Eisenhower's post-war memoir, Crusade in Europe, devoted significant space to the Rhine crossing. General Patton's crossing at Oppenheim represented both the best and most difficult aspects of his command style. Operationally brilliant, diplomatically catastrophic. But successful beyond question. Would the war have been won without Patton? Certainly. Would it have been won as quickly, with as many memorable achievements? Probably not. In a 1962 interview, a journalist asked Eisenhower directly, "What did you really think when Patton called to say he'd cross the Rhine?" Eisenhower smiled. "My first thought was, of course he did. By that point in the war, I'd learned to expect George to do the unexpected. My second thought was, how am I going to explain this to Montgomery and Churchill? And my third thought was, thank God George is on our side?" The interviewer pressed. "Which thought was strongest?" "All three," Eisenhower admitted. That was the challenge of commanding Patton. You experienced all three emotions simultaneously, constantly. The Rhine crossing stands today as perhaps the perfect encapsulation of George S. Patton's military genius and personal complexity. He achieved the impossible, crossing Germany's last great barrier with minimal casualties and no elaborate preparation. He demonstrated that audacity and surprise could accomplish what overwhelming force might not. He proved that American operational flexibility had evolved beyond European military tradition. But he also created diplomatic nightmares, undermined Allied coordination, and put his personal glory ahead of operational cohesion. Eisenhower's final assessment, written years after the war, captured this duality perfectly. Managing Patton was like commanding a thunderstorm. You couldn't control where the lightning would strike. You could only try to direct the general direction of the storm and then manage the consequences of where the lightning actually hit. But when that lightning struck the right target, as it did at the Rhine, the results were spectacular. George Patton crossed the Rhine because he saw an opportunity and seized it without hesitation. That same quality made him nearly impossible to command, and absolutely irreplaceable. The phone call on March 22, 1945, "We're across the Rhine," represents more than a tactical surprise. It represents the eternal tension between genius and discipline, between bold improvisation and careful planning, between the individual warrior and the larger military machine. What Eisenhower said in that moment, his shock, his frustration, his admiration revealed everything about leadership at the highest level. Sometimes the hardest part of command isn't fighting the enemy. It's managing your own most talented, most difficult, most irreplaceable subordinates. And sometimes when they do the impossible, all you can do is shake your head, manage the diplomatic fallout, and thank God they're on your side. If this deep dive into one of World War II's most dramatic moments fascinated you, then you need to subscribe to this channel immediately. We bring you the untold stories from history's greatest conflicts, the human drama behind the headlines, the conversations that shaped nations, the impossible achievements that changed the course of war. These aren't just history lessons. They're windows into the minds of the leaders who made decisions under unimaginable pressure. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our next video. Because the best stories from history aren't in the textbooks, they're in moments like these. When a phone rang at midnight and George Patton announced he'd done the impossible. Again.